Love doesn't end with a scream. Sometimes it fades behind closed doors, in whispers never meant to be heard. Ethan sat in the half-lit kitchen, his coffee cold, his thoughts louder than the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, dawn was trying to break through the fog, but inside the house the air was thick with something heavier than sleep. He heard her voice, soft, laughing, alive in a way it hadn't been with him in months. "He just gets me," she said through the cracked office door. Those words hit harder than betrayal itself. They carried ease, comfort, a kind of warmth that used to belong to him. Have you ever realized too late that someone stopped talking to you long before they stopped loving you? He didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't breathe. He just listened, because sometimes silence hurts more than confrontation. Ethan walked out into the yard, the grass wet with dew, the air heavy with the kind of quiet that only happens after something unseen has cracked. He didn't confront her that morning. He couldn't. Instead, he let the distance between them grow roots. Every glance became an observation. Every silence a sentence. He began to listen not to her words, but to the pauses between them. Claire felt it too. The shift. She noticed the way Ethan stopped finishing his coffee, stopped asking if she wanted hers sweetened. They still spoke, but only to fill air, never hearts. And somewhere in between good morning and good night, the laughter found another home. That night, Ethan replayed every word he'd overheard, twisting them into new meanings. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe he misunderstood. But deep down, he knew. Betrayal rarely comes as confession. It seeps in through moments of unguarded joy. Before dawn, Ethan wrote her a note he never gave her. Just one line. "I still hear you, even when you think I'm not listening." He folded it once, placed it in the drawer beside their wedding rings, and walked out to the porch as the first light of day crept across the world that used to be theirs. "Oh, now show, roar, and AJ, down, fight." Days passed like pages left unturned. Ethan no longer lingered by the office door. He didn't need to. The truth had already moved in, quiet and invisible. Claire's laughter still carried through the walls, but it no longer reached him. It brushed past like wind through an open window. He began to collect small details. Her new perfume, the way she smiled at her phone, the new password on her laptop. None of it was enough to accuse her, but all of it was enough to know. Claire worked late more often now. She claimed deadlines, new projects, endless meetings. Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he waited, listening to the silence of an untouched dinner, the ticking clock, the hum of a refrigerator filling the space where laughter once lived. Ethan started walking in the evenings, circling the same block until the lights in their house went out. He didn't know if he was avoiding her or himself. Sometimes he'd stop under the same street lamp, close his eyes, and try to remember the sound of her laughter when it still belonged to him. One night, she left her phone on the counter, unlocked. He didn't plan to look. But the light caught his eye, and curiosity, that cruel temptation of the betrayed. 1. The messages weren't explicit, not yet, but they were warm, familiar, and soft in a way that spoke volumes. Words like, "missed you," and "you make my day easier." When she came home, he didn't mention the messages. He simply watched her move through the house, watched the way she avoided his eyes. And as he turned away to pour himself another drink, he realized that love doesn't always die. It just gets quieter, until you can't hear it anymore. It was a Sunday when silence finally began to speak. Claire was in the garden, pruning the roses she planted last spring. Ethan watched her from the window, not out of anger, but out of grief. He wondered how love could look so peaceful while dying. The sunlight touched her face like it used to touch his heart, but he no longer felt warmth. Only the memory of it. When she came inside, her hands smelled of soil and rain. She spoke about the garden, the roses, the weather, everything except them. Ethan nodded, his responses brief, polite, rehearsed. He felt like a guest in his own story, waiting for the final page to turn. That night, Claire left her phone face down on the nightstand. It buzzed once, then again. Ethan stared at it in the dark, light bleeding through the cracks of his restraint. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The truth has a way of revealing itself without evidence. The next morning, he found her humming softly while making coffee. For a moment, he almost forgot. He wanted to ask if she still loved him, but the words caught somewhere between pride and pain. Instead, he just said, "You're up early." She smiled without looking up, and that small motion broke something inside him. Later that day, Ethan took out his old camera, the one Claire bought him years ago. He walked around the house, taking pictures of ordinary things, her empty chair, the unmade bed, their wedding photo fading in the frame. He realized then that memory was just another form of mourning. The house had learned to keep their secrets. Every creak, every sigh of the floorboards carried the sound of things left unsaid. Ethan began noticing the way Claire avoided certain questions, the way she smiled when her phone lit up, but never when he spoke. He didn't want to accuse her. He wanted her to tell him the truth, because love shouldn't have to hide to exist. That night, Ethan finally asked, "Do you still love me?" The words sounded too small, too fragile to carry the weight of years. Claire didn't answer right away. She looked at him, searching for anger, maybe even for hope, but there was only exhaustion. "I don't know," she said, and that was the most honest thing she'd told him in months. After that night, silence became their language. They moved around each other carefully, like ghosts afraid to touch. Claire cooked dinner. Ethan washed the dishes. They laughed sometimes, out of habit, but their eyes no longer met long enough to remember why. Ethan started writing again, something he hadn't done since before the wedding. Words came out of him in fragments. Silence, absence, maybe someday. He didn't write about her. He wrote about the emptiness she left behind while still living in the same space. One evening, while cleaning, Claire found his notebook. She read a few lines and closed it gently. Her eyes filled, not with guilt, but with recognition. She realized that somewhere along the way he had already started saying goodbye. One word at a time. Rain came that night as if the sky couldn't hold back either. Claire sat by the window, watching the streetlights blur through the downpour. Ethan stood behind her, hands buried in his pockets, heart heavy with words he couldn't say. They were both waiting for one of them to move, to confess, to end what had already ended in silence. But no one did. Sometimes love doesn't die from betrayal. It dies from the fear of what comes after truth. The argument came without warning, like thunder that had been waiting for days. It wasn't about the messages, or the distance, or even the silence. It was about everything. Years of unspoken disappointment, of missed chances and swallowed words. When she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you," he almost laughed. "You didn't have to mean it," he whispered. "You just had to stop caring." Afterward, the rain eased, but the silence deepened. Claire went to bed without saying goodnight. Ethan stayed up, staring at the empty space beside him on the couch. He realized it wasn't betrayal that hurt. It was knowing she no longer fought for what they had. Quiet surrender is louder than any goodbye. Claire lay awake, eyes open to the ceiling. She remembered when love felt easy, when laughter filled this same room like sunlight. She didn't hate him. She just couldn't reach him anymore. Somewhere between their shared dreams and their quiet mornings, they had lost the version of themselves that once belonged only to each other. By morning, the air felt different, lighter, colder. Ethan found her note on the kitchen table. "I need to find myself again," it read. There were no accusations, no goodbyes, just truth written simply, painfully, honestly. He folded it once, like the note he'd written months ago but never gave her, and placed it beside his coffee cup. This time, he didn't wait for the silence to answer. He just listened to it and let it speak. The morning after she left, the house felt hollow, every sound echoing longer than it should. Ethan didn't cry. He just stood in the doorway where her shoes used to be, where her laughter used to start every day. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was honest. He finally understood that some endings don't need closure. They need acceptance. Days stretched quietly. Ethan found comfort in routine. The hum of the kettle, the slow pour of coffee, the quiet company of morning light. He didn't delete her number or erase her messages. Instead, he let them stay, like old photographs, reminders of who they were, not who they became. Claire, miles away now, walked along a shoreline she hadn't seen in years. She thought about him, about the way he listened even when she didn't speak. She wondered if he was okay, if he'd ever forgive her. The truth was, she hadn't left for another man. She left because somewhere along the way, she had forgotten who she was outside of there. Ethan began fixing things around the house. The loose drawer, the broken clock, the garden she once tended. Each repair was a small apology, not to her, but to himself, for letting love decay without trying to save it. Healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to live with the missing pieces. One evening, he found an old photo of them at the lake, young, laughing, unaware of how hard love would become. He smiled, not in pain, but in gratitude. Love had broken him, yes, but it had also taught him how to see himself again, stripped of illusion, full of truth. Ethan woke before sunrise, the sky just beginning to pale, that soft blue hour where everything feels both alive and still. The bed was colder on one side, but he didn't mind anymore. He got used to the emptiness, how it no longer felt like loss but space. He opened the windows, let the morning in, and felt the wind graze his face like forgiveness. He thought of Claire sometimes, not with anger, not even with longing, but with something quieter. Gratitude, maybe, the kind that comes when you finally understand someone's leaving wasn't meant to hurt you. It was meant to free you. He realized that love had never really left. It had just changed form, transforming from presence to memory, from needing to understand it. And as sunlight pooled on the floor, Ethan smiled, small and real, the kind that comes only after surviving yourself. Claire moved into a small apartment above a bookstore, where the smell of old paper and coffee lingered in the walls. At first, the silence scared her. It was too sharp, too honest, but slowly she learned to fill it with music, with the sound of her own breathing, with pages turning. She started painting again, tracing color into her loneliness. Every brushstroke was an apology to herself for forgetting her own voice. She thought of Ethan often, not as the man she left, but as the man who once held her when she couldn't hold herself. Sometimes she wished she could tell him she was sorry, not for leaving, but for staying too long after love had gone. But she didn't. Instead, she let her silence speak. And for the first time, it felt like peace, not punishment. Weeks passed. Ethan began running every morning, following the same trail by the river that he and Claire once walked together. At first, he did it to distract himself, to fill time. But soon, the rhythm of his breath, the sound of his feet against the dirt, became its own kind of prayer. With every mile, the weight lifted a little more. He didn't chase healing anymore. He simply let it happen. One morning, he stopped mid-run to watch the sunrise ripple across the water, the world alive with color again. He realized he was finally part of the present, not trapped in the echo of what was lost. For the first time in years, he didn't feel broken. He felt whole in his aloneness. And that, he thought, must be what healing really is. Learning to belong to yourself again. Claire started writing letters she never sent. Not to apologize, not to explain, just to remember. She wrote about the way Ethan smiled when he was trying not to laugh, the sound of rain on their kitchen roof, The smell of his shirts left in the laundry basket. Each memory became softer with time, like stones smoothed by water. She realized that love, in its truest form, doesn't demand permanence. It asks only to be felt, to be learned from. And though their story had ended, its meaning did. One evening, she stood on her balcony watching city lights shimmer below and whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried it away, but she knew somehow it reached him, wherever he was. Months later, they crossed paths again. Not planned, just life's quiet coincidence. A cafe on a rainy afternoon, the kind they once would have chosen together. They smiled, exchanged a few gentle words, and for a heartbeat, time folded back. But this time, there was no pain, no ache, just peace. They spoke of small things, of how they were, of how life had changed. When they parted, it wasn't with goodbye, but with the kind of smile that says thank you for everything once were. As Ethan stepped into the rain, he looked up at the sky, felt it on his skin, and knew. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without need to return. And somewhere across town, Claire smiled too, sensing the same quiet freedom.